Hi, my name is Ken Gosnell, and I am the CEO and founder of CEO Experience. We work with Christian business owners to help them hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant, by helping them to build their business, by growing that business, and doing so to have a kingdom impact. We do that through offering them a variety of retreats, whether it's a personal retreat through private coaching, or whether it's team retreats, or whether it's with peer retreats. And today I want to talk to you about what we call the biblical business principles. We believe that there are biblical business principles that every CEO should embrace in order to help them to grow their business with kingdom impact. These biblical business principles can help them to make better decisions. And as they make better decisions, they will fulfill what Jesus prayed, Lord, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. These biblical business principles are not only helpful in building a great business, they're also beneficial in making decisions in their life and also in helping them to enhance their personal relationship with Jesus. Because it's important to be successful not only in business, it's also important to be successful in our personal lives and also our spiritual life as well. In fact, business is too hard, life is too important and too short, and eternity is too long not to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. And so I want to walk through today these biblical business principles that are important and should shape every decision that you'll make in your life and in your business if you want to help your business to reflect more of God's kingdom in the decisions that you make. What I ended up looking at was I looked at every leader in the Bible, all the way from Genesis to Revelation. And I also studied businesses for the last over 150 years, all the way back into the 1800s, all the way from businesses before the Industrial Revolution, through the Industrial Revolution, even into the modern age. And I found that the businesses that were super successful were businesses that practice biblical business principles. And in fact, they practice these biblical business principles, and some of them didn't even know that they were biblical business principles. And so I want to outline these biblical business principles for you today. I want to show you in this what we call the executive guide. This is what we call in a CEO executive guide that we produce every single month. This is one that is specifically related to the biblical business principles. We believe that business is ever changing and the Bible is inexhaustive. And so we never repeat business guides. And so we're an evergreen growing organization. And so we produce guides with the Biblical Business Foundation principles as the foundation, but these guides also talk about business applications that are related to business. So we talk about things related to sales and marketing, to human resources, to operations, to team development, culture, and to company customer service, and so on and so forth. So every month we produce an executive guide that can be used in peer retreats, it can be used with the team, and it can be used in executive coaching. But it's all designed to help a business owner or a CEO to help them to hear God's voice. And so we do want to talk about these biblical business principles, and we're going to walk through these different principles today. We found them in all throughout the Bible, but we also found them specifically in the ministry of Jesus. And so they've aligned themselves really into three specific buckets, if you will. The first bucket is what we call the proclamations of Jesus. There were certain statements that Jesus made that really help us and bring clarity into the decisions related to our life and to our business, such as Jesus telling his disciples, if anybody forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. And that just wasn't a good customer service statement. That's a good life statement. That's a good statement that should apply to how we handle our finances. It's a good statement that how we should handle operations. It's a good statement that how we should handle our employees. And so those are all related to the statements that Jesus made. The second set of principles relate to what we call the parables of Jesus. And Jesus had several business parables, such as the parable of the steward or the servants, that where we get the words, well done, good and faithful servant, where he gave one servant 5 talents, and he gave another servant 2 talents, and he gave another servant 1 talent. And then he expected them to go and be good stewards of the talents that they had. And then the leader came back and he expected to give an account for the talents that they had. And so that principle is what we call make the move from owner to overseer. They didn't own the talents, they were just stewards of the talents. They were overseeing the talents for a period of time, and then they had to give the talents back. And so these are all stories that Jesus told. And then the last set of principles are really on the practices of Jesus. And so practice, for example, is to know the order of things and to work the order. Jesus always knew the order of things. There was a process to everything that Jesus did, and he never got his order out of alignment. He always knew that there was a first and a second and a third and a fourth, and he knew what that order and how important it was. And so knowing the order of things in our life is extremely important all throughout our life. And so understanding these buckets and how we go about making decisions in and throughout our lifetime is extremely important. And what's important is that they apply to not just one area of our business or one area of our life, but to every area of our business and to every area of our life. And so as the more we integrate those principles and practices all throughout our life and all throughout our business, the more we reflect the kingdom of God and the more that we have impact in and throughout our business, and the more we're able to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. See, I'm on a mission, and I believe that Christian business leaders and anyone that really wants to have a personal relationship with Jesus, anybody that's welcoming God into a partnership with them in their life and into their business, is on a mission to hear the words, well done in their life. So let's kind of walk through these principles together, because I believe that these principles can transform and change the way you live and the way that you run your business. And so the first principle is we should always take the second step. This is principle number 1. Jesus made a statement to his disciples that if anyone forces you to go 1 mile with them, you should go with them 2 miles. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 41. And one mistake that many business leaders make today is we think that this is a customer service principle, that we only think that as it relates to going the extra mile is something that we should do where it comes to serving the customer. And that's a fractured view of this particular principle. Now, I want you to notice that every one of these principles are written in such a way that you can teach these to every employee, and you can say these to any person in and throughout in your world and begin to get the buy-in to them. And so they're a way that you can automatically have impact as you begin to teach them. It's important to begin to help people to begin to understand that everyone should be able to take a second step in their life, that there's always another step to take in our life. The way I write it in the book that I wrote a book called Well Done, 12 Biblical Business Principles to Grow Your Business with Kingdom Impact, is that there are 5 powerful words in life and those 5 words are always go a little further. They contain a secret, successful principle that business leaders and companies have practiced for thousands of years. And the people that find that little principle have found a competitive edge in every area of their life, whether it's how Chick-fil-A treats their customers or the Container Store by giving first-year employees 200 hours of training compared to the competitors or the industry average of only 8. Or Buck Knives, who offers a lifetime guarantee of each knife that will be free of materials, defects, and workmanship. Or Disneyland, that pays such attention to the details that does not allow their customers to point with only one finger, but tells guests that they want to always point with 2, and they make sure that they never tell a guest they don't know. You see, every one of these companies have learned the art of going a little further, are always taking a second step. Another way to phrase that is to have a second mile mentality. Jesus taught his disciples that a second step principle is a way of life, not just a way to do business. It's a way to act and think differently in the world in which we live so that we can model and design to others that we can separate ourselves from a culture that's just wanting to do as little as possible or just do enough to get by. In a business, servant-led companies need to separate themselves from their competition, and excellent companies always exhibit differentiating factors so that others can find them and themselves and their products and services a little more effective and clearly. The idea of just doing a little bit more or always taking another step is a clear way to communicate a way to the kingdom. I said a second step is not only good for business, but it's mandatory for leaders who look to make an impact for God's kingdom. And I love this principle because it reminds me that God never leaves us without another step to take. No matter where we are in life or what's going on in our world or how difficult it might be in our life or our business, or even what's going on in the life of our employee, there's always another step to take. And when we take it for God and with God, he often helps us to find the pathway through. I'm reminded of the story of Moses, who was one of the best leaders that ever led. And he's leading the people of Israel out of captivity, and he gets into a very difficult situation, much like many business leaders. And he's led them out into a dead end. And in front of him, there's a Red Sea, and behind him is an Egyptian army, and he prays to God, and he says, God, help me. What should I do next? Where should I go? What steps should I take? I can't go forward, and I can't go back. And God said, there's a second step. Go step into the water. And God doesn't tell him what's coming next. He just tells him to go take a step. He doesn't go tell him to take 5 steps. He doesn't tell him to take 10 steps or 15 steps or 20 steps or 30 steps. He only tells him to take 1 step. And it's a step of faith. And it tells us that when Moses stepped into the water, that God parted the waters and they were able to cross over the Red Sea on the dry land. You see, sometimes in life and in business, it's that second step story that's important. That can often be the God moment of your business that God's waiting for you to take. And he's waiting you to recognize that he's going to do something significant in the life of your customer or your life of your finances or in the life of your product or in the life of your business or in your personal life. The second principle is what we call the golden rule works if you work it. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, Jesus makes this statement. So in everything you do, do to others what you would have them to do to you. Now, the golden rule, it used to be a principle that everybody understood and everybody practiced, all even around the world. And it doesn't matter what religion you came from or if you had no religion at all. Unfortunately, in our today culture and society, many people have forgotten or even never been taught this golden rule practice or principle. But the principle of the golden rule works if you work it is a principle that needs to be taught and embraced in business and in life. The leader in business that forgets to put people first need a refresher course on the fundamentals of business. The company that succeeds are the one that elevate people. The most successful businesses use a simple guidepost that have helped them to thrive for over many years. And it is the simple rule of the golden rule that Jesus first taught on the Sermon on the Mount. Matter of fact, one of the greatest businesses in America has been built on this principle, the golden rule. And it was the company that J.C. Penney. Matter of fact, J.C. Penney's first name when he started his store back in the early 1900s was called the Golden Rule Store. Matter of fact, he says this in a book that he wrote in 1950 called 50 years with the golden rule. He says, I cannot remember a time when the golden rule was not my model or precept, the torch that guided my footsteps. And I think it's so funny and interesting that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses that were started with J.C. Penney in department stores that started alongside of him or came along after him during the years of the early 1900s when he started his business in Catering, Wyoming, during the gold rush of the early 1900s. And here it is, 2025, over 125 years later, his business still stands, and those businesses stand on the sidelines of the legacies of the past. Many businesses could and should be out of business today because they've forgotten the principle and the value of people. In fact, news outlets and business publications consistently report that many companies no longer make decisions in the best interest of people, but they often very only consider the bottom line. Can I suggest today to suggest to us that such thinking is short-sighted and will never provide long-term success? The very first question that every business should ask is the basic question: is this decision good for the customer? When a decision is good for the customer, it is usually right for the company. One of our mentors of mine and a dear friend, a good CEO that was in business for over 50 years, a CEO by the name of Doug Hillmuth, owner of Hillmuth Auto Care in Washington, D.C., had a simple motto that he taught his general managers and employees for years. He asked a simple question to every employee. He said, have you made any friends today? And through this question, he communicated to his team that friendship with the customer meant more than just achieving a sale. He understood that customers are friends of the business. The customer should focus on treating them that way. And he used that concept to build his business into a thriving enterprise that endured over 40 years. Here's the reality. When customers feel cared for and listened to, they will be more likely to consider a personal relationship to a product or an organization that produces what they purchase. Remember, bottom line thinking is short-sighted and will never provide long-term success. Principle number 3, grow profit with a purpose. Jesus made this statement in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 26. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? Now, every successful business creates profits, and healthy companies are designed for a purpose. But it's not just all about profits. It should be profits with a purpose. And matter of fact, even the most successful companies are not always profitable. But all companies can be purposeful. Matter of fact, Edward Deming, who wrote a great book called Beyond the Crisis, he said, profit in a business comes from repeat customers that boast about the products and services and that bring friends with them. In the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25, all the talents produce profitability. Yet while enabling sustainability and growth for the Christian business owner, profits alone can be terribly unsatisfying. Wise leaders understand that excessive focus on the bottom line can be damaging. That's why well-done leaders seek to build businesses with underlying purpose that's greater than just profits alone. Without purpose, earning money leaves only feeling powerless. Jesus asked his followers in Mark 8, verse 36, what good is it for someone to gain the world and yet forfeit their soul? When a company focuses on profits without a purpose, they lose their way. But when a company focuses on profits with a purpose, it sets itself ahead of the competition. It leaves a legacy because of the way that the leaders have used it for wealth. Purposeful profits can be a funnel through which God brings resources in the hands of businesses so they in turn can be used for kingdom purposes. And having a purpose with your profits means even when you're not profitable, you can still focus on your purpose. That's why we even have another mantra at CXP. We have another axiom that we believe, and we say we have a no margin mission, which means that some people believe that only when you have margin can you have mission. And there's some Christian organizations that teach that you got to be profitable in order to have a kingdom impact. Well, we say, no, you can have no profits and still have a kingdom impact, because sometimes, as long as you have a purpose in your business, you can have a no margin mission. That means, yes, we want you to drive profits and we want you to be successful and we want you to be profitable. But more than that, we want you to be purposeful. Because if you have a purpose, then even in some times when it's difficult or hard, you can still have an internal and kingdom impact that makes a difference. And then the last principle in this first set is principle number 4, know your yeses and nos. Jesus made this powerful statement in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 36 and 37. He says, and do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair black or white. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond that comes from the evil one. One of the difficult aspects for a business owner or a CEO is often the ability to be clear. And I say when the leader is clear, everybody and everything in the organization becomes clear. Part of our clarity comes from our ability to say yes and no. Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, discussed this fundamental principle about yes and no when he wrote about his desire to have his company make sure that they were being a company that grew at the right size. He discussed the fundamental principle to grow, make sure that they could manage their growth. He said, Cathy writes in Eat More Chicken, he said, while companies may set goals that all goes according to well, but he said, but if we extended ourselves to the limits of their finances and their talents, even a slight economic downturn can force them to lay off employees in order to salvage things. You don't build a good reputation by discharging people, but rather by developing people. I go on to say, Cathy applied the yes and no principle, not only opening stores, but by growing at the right pace to keep them open. He recalled how when Jimmy Collins came on board as the chief operating officer, he told Collins, the CEO, not just to open restaurants, but to make sure they stayed open. He said, I placed the greatest emphasis on stay open. That sank in with Jimmy and everyone else who came in to work with us. I want everyone at Chick-fil-A to know that we don't build and open restaurants just so that we can close them if they don't work out. We must be careful about how we build them, where we put them, and who we put in them to run them. Anyone can open a restaurant. All that it does is takes money, but keeping one open is what makes the difference. The power to say yes and no is what really helps leaders to know where they're going and how to stay focused to make sure that they're accomplishing what they're supposed to. Well-done leaders show clarity to make sure that their words mean something. They work hard to develop and build trust relationships with their team by conveying to others that they can count on the leader's commitment. And one of the ways they do that is they know their no's because their no's make the difference. Principle number 5, make the move from owner to overseer. Jesus tells a parable about the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 21. The person with the 5 talents doubled them, and he replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. While a shift from owner to overseer is not a simple task, it becomes easier to understand why the shift is so significant and essential for business owners seeking to honor God. Wayne Grudem, who's a professor and wrote a book called The Business of Glorifying God, he says, when we are responsible stewards, whether taking care of our toys at age 4 or managing an entire factory at the age of 40, if we do this work as we do it unto the Lord, God looks at our imitation of his sovereignty and other attributes, and he is pleased. In this way, we are his image bearers, people who are like God on earth. Whether we own few possessions or many, or whether we own a small business or a large one. Every leader seeks useful information on how well the business is performing. The committed leader also seeks to know how individuals in the business are performing. These leaders call people to give an account for their work and their efforts. Reporting is only fearful prospect for individuals who are not performing well, but good performers are never bothered by giving a report or an update for what they do or even what they don't do. So making a shift from owner to overseer allows us to welcome God into the conversation and to consider what he would want us to do with our business. The shift helps the leader to embrace our true identity as a steward, not an owner of the business. And I just love this principle. It's so important to unpack, because it really does make the difference. If I think I own the business, I treat it one way. If I think I'm just a steward of the business, I treat it in a completely different way. Principle number 6, trust the law of sowing and reaping. Jesus tells another story about a parable where a sower goes out and has some seed, and some of that seed falls on the pathway and doesn't grow. And some of the seed falls into the weedy soil and grows for a little bit and then chokes out. And some of the seed falls into the shallow soil. And then some of the seed falls into the rich soil, and it grows and produces a crop of 30, 60, and 100-fold. And we say we should trust the law of sowing and reaping, Matthew chapter 13, verse 8. Other seed fell on the good soil, where produced a crop. Jesus taught in this principle the parable of the sower about a farmer who planted seeds that fell on the different types of soil. When the seed was planted in the right place, it has the potential to produce 100-fold return. One seed can produce a Hobby Lobby sized harvest. 2 Corinthians 9:6 says this, catch this. The point is this: whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will reap bountifully. I love the way the New Living Translation translates that verse. It says, remember this, the one who plants a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. The truth is, where it comes to this principle, and sometimes we have to think about, am I planting generously? Am I planting sparingly? What seeds have I planted? What decision am I making? The truth is, the person that will never reap a harvest from a seed that's never been planted. And sometimes we need to make sure that we're thinking about the type of soil that we're planting in. Principle number 7, believe and ask in the impossible. Jesus tells another story, a parable about a persistent widow that goes and presents her case again and again and again and again through prayer to the judge. And finally, the judge answers her prayer. And here's what Jesus says at the end of that story, Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. Jesus looked at them and said, with man, it is impossible. With God, all things are possible. And here's the point of this principle. No matter what the circumstances, God's people have always believed in the impossible. Daniel in the lion's den, Gideon against the army that vastly outnumbered his, young David facing down a 9-foot-tall Goliath, Paul surviving attacks designed to erase him from the earth. Such tales only sound easy in the retelling, but in the midst of battle, whether it's against a physical army, a powerful ruler, a great recession, faith can also often be in short supply. But really, that's why they call it faith. And for a well-done leader, we ought to have a big faith. A God-sized vision for an organization can change how a steward leader thinks and dreams. Matter of fact, everything great in life starts with a dream. The world is better when people dream big dreams and believe that the impossible can happen. One of the things we ought to do as leaders is every year and every month, we ought to be asking what if questions, to start challenging ourselves to think bigger. What if God could do this? What if we could expand to a new territory? What if this person could use this gift or this ability? What if what seems impossible now, God could make possible. Here's the reality: people can really do the impossible when somebody believes it's possible. And often, as the business owner or the CEO of a company, you're the one that has to believe it's possible. You have to look at those individuals in your company, and you have to see talents and gifts and ability that they didn't believe that they had themselves. You have to believe that your company can reach new heights that the team didn't believe that that would be able to be possible. You have to believe that God's doing something in this business that only God could do with that particular business. Too many leaders think too small. They don't allow God to come and partner with them in the business to create a bigger vision of what God can do in and throughout that business with them. You know, people can do amazing things when somebody believes in them. Peter was just a fisherman, but Jesus believed he could be a fisher of men. When leaders believe the impossible, then all things become possible. And well done leaders are visionaries, and they believe the possibilities of the future. They know that impossible things can happen because they serve a big God that longs for his people to do things that matter. Sometimes these things can start with a simple ask, and sometimes simple prayers that can align a leader's heart and an attitude with the one who knows what is really possible. So I challenge leaders to think what I call a his G's, a huge, impossible spiritual goal. What's a huge, impossible spiritual goal that can be accomplished through your business? I could tell you so many great stories about business owners that I work with that just all of a sudden started doing things in their business, but because they were challenged to think of a huge, impossible spiritual goal, they started to do something for God's kingdom, and they had a kingdom impact, and thousands of people were saved, or Bibles were handed out, or missionaries were served, or millions of dollars were given to missionary causes, or wells were dug, or homes were bought, or villages were created. And all through the businesses that were done, kingdoms were changed because in kingdom impacts were built because somebody believed it was possible, because somebody created a huge, impossible spiritual goal. That's just on the spiritual side. That's not even on the business side. Um, Family legacies were built, and children took over businesses, and all these different types of things. Principle number 8: build to the fourth generation. Again, thinking longer term. One of the things that I found very interesting in this principle is that sometimes we think too short. God had a longer vision. He tells a story in the Bible, a parable about two builders. One built his house upon the rock, the other built his house upon the sand. And he says in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24 and 25, the one who hears the words of mine and puts them into practice is like the wise man that built his house upon the rock. And the rains came, and the streams rose, and the winds blew, and the beat against the house, and yet it did not fall, because its foundation was on the rock. You know, God gives insight. I call it a four generational thinking, this 100-year business, fourth generation into the golden calf. In Exodus chapter 34, catch this. Exodus chapter 34, verses 4 through 7, it says, Moses chiseled out 2 stones and tablets like the first one. He went up to Mount Sinai early in the morning as Lord commanded him, and he carried 2 stone tablets in his hand. And Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him, and he proclaimed his name, the Lord. And then he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming the Lord. And the Lord had compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining a love to the thousands, and forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. And he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and children for their sins to the parents, to the fourth, third, and fourth generation. Catch this vision. What God's doing here. He states that his punishment will continue until the third and fourth generation. In genealogy, that's typically a generation of 20 to 25-year time span. Therefore, God is saying to his people that he's doing something that could last 100 years in length. But now contrast that to what he also says about his grace that he gives in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9. About his favor, he says this, know therefore that the Lord God is God, and he's faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations to those who love him and keep his commandments. Wow, 1,000 generations. Here's the point. God has a long view. He punishes to 4 generations and he loves the thousands generations. 1,000 generations could last up to 25,000 years. The point that needs to be made is God wants his people to have a long view. The well-done leader is not a short-sighted leader. The well-done leader is a leader who builds something that can bless future generations, not one generation, not a second generation, not a third generation, but a fourth generation. Think about that. You're building your business not for your children. You're building your business not for your grandchildren. You're building your business for your great grandchildren. Think about that kind of generational legacy that your great grandchildren will build to do something significant for the kingdom of God because of what you're doing today. I love the story of Job, and this is where I get another one of these ideas of this fourth generation thinking, right? Job was a faithful businessman, and Satan comes to test him and tempt him, and tells us that Satan was able to take everything away from Job, his family and his wealth and everything that he had. And then at the end of the story of Job, it tells us that God elongated his life to the 4th generation so that he could see his 4th generation children live. So that Job could see it, physically see it, the blessing of his 4th generation. You see, that's the vision that God has for all of us. The well-done leader knows that the right foundation is vital to the success in the world and significance of what to come. So we make decisions today building to that 4th generation of what's to come, building on that future. Principle number 9, know the order of things and work the order. Jesus, this is a practice of Jesus. Jesus always knew the order of things. He made this statement, but seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Jesus had the practice of knowing his order and working that order. Here's a statement that we make, a CXP axiom. When the leader understands the order of things, things become easier to understand. Jesus reminded his followers of first priorities. He understood that it's easy to confuse the order of things and become distracted by things that are urgent or urgent in the moment and not necessarily essential for long-term success. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, he makes the important 3-word comment, but seek first. When leaders know what's first, they can determine the order of things and begin to work that order. Well-done leaders do not become confused about the order of the things. Order is important. Jesus never wavered on the order. He knew what was important. He knew his mission. He knew what he needed to do to accomplish his mission. As a result, he knew how to place his actions and priorities and decisions and tasks in the order to help him to fulfill his ultimate purpose. He was driven by his passion, was able to get things done. He preached, he healed, he debated, he trained, all according to his mission, because he knew the order of importance of each day in which he lived. Many business leaders and businesses become confused about the order of things because they have a leader that doesn't know their order and doesn't communicate the order. Matter of fact, order is essential and effective in goal setting. Goals inspire actions and effectiveness. In their book, The Strategy Focused Organization, Harvard Business School's professor Robert Kaplan and David Norton noted only 7% of employees fully understand how they can help achieve the company's goals. During a presentation at the 2015 Goals Summit, first hosted by the Better Works organization to discuss OKRs, CEO Chris Duggan said that companies that do goal setting quarterly are 3.5 times more likely to be top performers in their industry. Know your order. Principle number 10, improve your team to improve your organization. Jesus practiced this. I love the fact that Jesus is the only leader that could have ever led alone, and yet he was the leader that the very first thing he ever did after his time in the wilderness is he went out and got his team. No great leader ever led alone. Matthew chapter 4, verse 20, Jesus said to Peter, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." And at once they left their nets and they followed him. The most exceptional leader, Jesus, modeled the process of developing an organization bigger than himself. He set an example of how to develop a robust and healthy organization by building a team that could produce results with him when necessary and lead without him when critical. One key mistake many business leaders make is not developing a capable team. Great leaders who learn from others will often learn faster. God never intended for the leader to lead by themselves. Instead, he calls people to walk beside the leader to help them to accomplish the purposes that God has called for the leader to compete. He did this in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. He saw that no suitable helper for Adam was available, and so he created Eve. One of my good friends, Dr. Randy Ross, wrote a great book called Relationomics. And in that book, Dr. Ross elevates the importance of building great relationships. He says the next time you find yourself scrolling through Facebook, instead of being present at the table, stop and engage with those around you. If you're consider staying late again at the office instead of being home for dinner or with your family or getting together with a friend, stop and reconsider. If you're being to treat people as assets to the organization rather than valued individuals who are worthy of time and attention, then reassess your leadership. If you find yourself hiring with little commitment to the long-term growth and development of team members, then revamp the system. If you begin to feel as though leadership is a solo endeavor, then slow down and spend more time cultivating connectedness with others. Principle number 11, do things today that impact today and tomorrow. This is an idea of having a look into the future, but acting with urgency in the moment. Jesus did this. Every action he had something that was going to happen for the future. Matthew chapter 6 says this, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. One of my favorite stories is about a woman by the name of Iberi Okoye. She was starting out her CPA firm in the Washington, D.C. area. She had no wealth, no profits. In times, she even probably doubted whether she could do the things that God was asking her to do. But she made a key pivot in her fortunes when she decided to make a difference for eternity. She realized that God had placed her in a business for a purpose. And awakened to the spiritual reality, she released ownership to God. And when she did, God blessed the business. She said a significant step came when she started tithing from her profits. She made this statement. She said, I put God on payroll and I expected him to show up. And he did. One way this entrepreneur invests in eternity is serving and caring for her clients. And that includes what she calls an eternal perspectives letter that she sends to those dealing with tough issues. She sends chaplains to meet with her customers and her employees. The letter contains a deeply personal message relating how relationships with Christ can help them in difficult times. This kingdom impact and customer care aren't just talk in her life. She acts out her faith. One time, a client had to cancel a meeting because of an emergency surgery. Not only did Iberi's team dispatch the Eternal Perspectives message, but they also sent flowers to the hospital. When the customer received them, she immediately called, thankful that someone had cared enough to notice when they were facing such a delicate operation. The client concluded by choking back tears and told how in almost 60 years of her life, no one had ever sent her flowers. To Iberi, a customer has more significance than a financial payoff for services rendered. Her character reflects the teachings of Christ, who made a habit of making kingdom impact everywhere he went. Jesus reminded his disciples he was moving their lives to a level of significance daily, not because of the job they were to do, but because of the way they were to do the job that they were to be given. The way we do our jobs and serve the public reveals the state of the hearts of where our treasure lies. Jesus reminds us in the Sermon on the Mount that we are not to store up for ourselves treasures on earth. We are to think eternally. One question CEOs often ask me is, where should they spend their time and energy? But later is a difficult one to answer because of the scope of business. Investments in the right product and critical infrastructure are essential to success. But above that, every leader should invest in areas that Jesus invested in as he sought to grow the organization. And one of the best ways I've discovered is growing in association with wise leaders. There's really three ways to learn. I call it the three levels of learning. We learn by ourselves, level one. We learn with a mentor or coach, level two. And we learn with the team, level three. That's the highest and best way to learn and spend our time. Jesus taught a group of people. The church is a team of people. The business is a team of people. And when all team members learn together, it will amplify the learning impact. Every leader should have a team retreat. And every leader needs a team to learn with, which is why every leader should have a CEO mastermind or participate in a CEO retreat, which is why we want to invite you to participate in a CXP CEO retreat. We have virtual retreats, we have in-person retreats, and we're going to be having a January retreat, 2-day retreat in Orlando, Florida, the very last Sunday and Monday of January. We want to invite you to participate. There is a cost to that, so you can find out more if you message me at Ken Gosnell at ceoexperience.com. Or you can just look at Eventbrite and find out about the CEO retreat, CXP CEO retreats. And then finally, principle number 12, work to well done. This is the last principle, and it's an important one because finish lines are also very important. Jesus did work to well done in all that he did. In Matthew 28, verse 19, Jesus tells his disciples to go into work to well done by telling them to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. In one of the most emotional scenes in the Bible, Jesus is completing his own essential work when he hangs on the cross, securing the forgiveness of all mankind. In this final act that he was set out to do in the 33 years of his life, the work that he dreamed about and had vision to complete even before he came to this earth, this climax moment of his life that he had discussed with his disciples, in which he had been training them and for many years. It was his mission. It was the work the Father had designed him to fulfill. Listen to the words of how John records this in John chapter 19 and verse 28 through 30. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and this scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." And a jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. And when he'd received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now note the last words that Jesus spoke from the cross. While subtle, they make a profound impact. While completing his most essential work, Christ proclaimed, "It is finished." It is finished. Those are the words that every well-done leader should be able to say with great clarity and conviction. In the parable of the talent, the master returns and speaks passionately of the two servants. And because of their excellent work and because they had finished their tasks, the leader says, "Well done." Every CEO who leads and builds a business wants to hear these words: "Well done, you finished the task." "Well done, are the words that we want to hear from customers and employees and vendors. The words well done can be spoken in terms of employee engagements and productivity and customer retentions and purchases and referrals and longevity. However, for the well done CEO who has an audience of one, it becomes a life desire to hear the words well done from God who's in heaven. It's his voice that matters. Hans Fenzel pens a fascinating book entitled The Top 10 Mistakes That Leaders Make. And in that book, he writes about a mistake that many leaders make in not investing in a successor in their leadership. He says, to end well, we must not get too wrapped up in our own indispensability. Humility is the key to finishing well and passing the torch to our successors. One of the keys to a successful leadership transition is to learn to hold our positions loosely. The tighter the grip, the more pride, the harder it becomes at any stage to let go. A loose grip is a humble grip, an attitude that knows our finitude and dispensability. Jesus knew he needed 12 disciples. What if he got tired and only called 11? Jesus knew that cities he was to preach in and miracles that he was to perform. He fulfilled his expectation and achieved the desired results. When a company has no idea about the results they're looking to achieve, they're often led by a leader who has no vision, or a leader who has no passion, or a leader who has no desire to hear the words well done. When a company produces something for the kingdom, God is pleased, and the leader will be pleased to hear the words, well done. Jesus' last commission to his disciples is the same commission that he himself went to work by. Work to well done. Jesus is inspiring his team to go and fulfill the mission that he called them to complete. He's desiring that they increase their focus, enhance their passion, fulfill their calling, so that at the end of their life, they will be able to hear the words, well done. These principles, 12 of them, 4 statements that Jesus made, proclamations, 4 parables or stories that Jesus told, 4 practices that Jesus lived by. These are the principles, the foundation of every decision that you can make in your life and in your business, if you will partner with Jesus and make him a partner in your business. It starts with just a partnership prayer. It just simply starts with making a proclamation yourself to say, I don't have much, and maybe I'm just starting out on this business endeavor myself, and I don't even know what it really means, God. But what I'd like to do is make you a partner with me in this business. And what that means is that I'd like to hear your voice. And if you can help me along the way, that I'll be happy to give you what I can and to let you lead and guide me along the pathway. And whatever you teach me or whatever you show me, I'll try to do so that I can hear the words, well done, and follow you. That's a partnership prayer. And if you'll pray that prayer in your life, then your business will be forever changed. Your life will be forever changed. Your family will be forever changed. And you will hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. And if you've prayed that prayer, if you've watched this video, then congratulations and well done. I'd love to send you this executive guide, and as a second step, I'd like to send you a bonus guide, the guide that we're going through this month. As we told you, we never repeat a guide. We have over almost 100 executive guides that we've produced now at CEO Experience. We produce them on a monthly basis. And we also have a guide subscription that you can support you. We also have a coaching methodology that you can become one of our CXP coaches and that you can go out and lead our CEO retreats. And if you'd like to find out more about that, you can email me for any of those things. Just email me directly at kengosnell@ceoexperience.com. Ken Gosnell at ceoexperience.com. Hey, thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and thank you for everything that you're doing for the kingdom of God and for partnering with God to make your business have kingdom impact and so that you can make a difference for all eternity. Well done.